Hello, and welcome to the Vulnerability Junkies podcast. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Jamie. On this podcast, we talk about the scary, vulnerable parts of our personal and professional growth, our identities as second-generation Asian Canadians, and talking about our feelings.
When life inevitably punches you in the face, do you have people you can turn to for help?
In today's episode, we go into how we learned, the painful way, that humans need support systems and how being vulnerable with others can really pay dividends in times of need. Let's get into it. Hello. We've arrived. We have arrived. Nice. Changing it up on the regular now, intentionally.
Yeah, got to keep it a little fresh. How you feeling today, Kevin?
Feeling okay. I think just came back from the gym, so physically like a 4 or 5. I'm tired, but yeah, emotionally 5 or 6.
Okay.
Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, physically I'm at like a 5. Emotionally, like a 6. I think I'm feeling a little restless, but the tiredness is mellowing me out from the restlessness.
Yeah. What's coming up for me is turbulent. It's a weird mix. There is some elements of calm and serenity, but also some elements of really not that. Of just, confusion, feeling a little bit emotionally tired, just like a little bit of exhaustion, emotional exhaustion, but also a lot of like energy. Like generally a good day today.
Mm-hmm. All right, Kevin, what is the topic for the day?
One thing that we've discussed in the past is our shared appreciation for having support systems in our lives and all the different times where we've just been really grateful for their existence. I had to learn very explicitly and somewhat painfully that A, support systems were a thing, and B, that they're something that you have to actively cultivate and build and maintain. So I'd be curious to learn today a bit about your experience, maybe share some of my own. And just connect on that.
Yeah. I really like the framing of it being the safety net because I think for the most part, as I'm walking around life, I'm like, I'm fine. I'm stable on my feet. But then every once in a while, something will kick me over.
That's right.
And in that moment, it doesn't really matter how much I've internally prepared. Like I've just come to appreciate that there are situations where I'm going to feel overwhelmed, and having that support network there to catch me, to remind me what's important to me, because I've spent so much time talking to them about what's important to me, has been really clarifying. And it feels really rewarding, especially in situations where it's mutually provided, where we're each kind of instilling a part of ourselves in the other person so that that part of ourselves that we trust is still there even when we don't find it in ourselves.
Wow. Yeah. I like that a lot as well. It's like you're like loaning out a piece of yourself to, loved ones, people that you trust. And then sometimes you're like, actually, I need to reference that again.
Yeah.
You still have it.
Like a kind of a silly physical metaphor for this is, look, I anticipate that I'm always going to have my house key on me, but I still want to have a spare key to give to someone else so that, if I mess up, they can get in. And it just is so, by coincidence, convenient that it also gives them more access to my place. And I think that the analogy works pretty well. It's you lend out these pieces, which gives people these insights into your life, but it also is there for safekeeping for when you need it because you lost it internally.
Yeah, that's an interesting, I think, first thread to pull on, actually. Like, what is a support system to you? And I'm asking to learn here because I'm curious if we have similar or exactly identical definitions. So,
yeah, I think that the support network for me really is about helping me stay stable. So it's not necessarily about charting the course for me for achievement or the thing that is really going to help me grow the best I can in the direct coaching sense. It's the thing that helps provide the emotional stability that I need in order to pursue those things. So what that means in practice is people that I can call up and be like, hey man, like I'm really confused right now. Do you have time to talk? Like I called you recently to do this exact thing and it was very helpful. And it occasionally means that I get whole like days of my life back where the alternative would have been sitting and ruminating. And sometimes it's just people to process with. It's not necessarily like I need perspective. I just need to talk about what's going on with me and know that the other person will be there to listen, even if they don't have any particular tactical advice. Like you're really good at this, that whenever I brain vomit a bunch of information at you, you'll be like, I'm hearing three things. These are the major elements. And I'm like, whoa, that's true. And that's helpfully distilled in a way that allows me to untangle the internal conflicts I'm feeling around the issue, which is super valuable.
Thank you.
Yeah. So
Um,
I think that the thing that's pulling me is I think that we both have stories of having these points in our lives where we started to realize that we were missing important parts or possibly basically all of this kind of support structure. So I want to hear about your own experiences of recognizing that and then what the process was for building it up and like what the gaps were that you noticed. And then I simply just want to connect on this and share experiences because I also have like a story to tell here.
Sweet. Yeah, I think my story for some more of our OG listeners will know already, but I think when I first realized support systems were a thing is I guess the first time that I really experienced being without. And I think for the most part, up until high school, I had basically gotten my support system for free in the form of friends that I saw every day at school with no incremental effort on my part, having parents to see kind of every day, all these people who were going through the same stage of life as me. So we had all this shared experience and shared context. So it was a lot easier for people to understand and a lot easier for me to reach out because you didn't really need to reach out. You would just see people every day and then, you chat and then things come up and then you share and then you have this supporting process kind of naturally just happened. I think the first time I realized it was a thing was that transition into college where all of a sudden you kind of like fall off a cliff in a way. All of that structure that you get for free just like disappears and you're kind of alone. I just remember around like the third month, so around like November is when it really all started to kind of hit me where I was trying to do the same things that I did in high school, like do school, but also do a lot of different extracurriculars and activities and clubs and meet new people and say yes to a lot of things. And I was just very used to being able to successfully manage all of those things by essentially not sleeping and throwing a lot of effort at all of the things. But it turns out in engineering school, you cannot do that. You can't do like 35 hours of school and then have assignments and projects and things on top of that. And then also like play sports like 4 times a week and do like 5 clubs at the same time. I was essentially experiencing being spread too thin at the same time. And then also didn't have that social kind of connection with people that I guess like there were just so many people and I hadn't actually intentionally tried to get to know any of them very well. And so there was no one really around me that I just, felt that I could really trust or that I had like close friends around me. And I just remember it all came to a head one of these nights in November of that first semester where I just felt like for some reason just like internally all knotted up and just compelled to like go talk to somebody. So I just remember coming out of my room. It was probably like 8 or 9 p.m. So it's pretty dark. And all my roommates were in their rooms. And I just kind of like knocked on one of their doors. And I was like, let's hang out and let's like, I feel like I want to go talk to somebody. And I just remember him answering the door and being like, yo, what's up? And I was like, I don't know, just like want to hang out and stuff. And he was just kind of like, I kind of just, I'm like, he basically was like, I'm busy or like, I don't really want to socialize right now.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And then that was just kind of like a door in the face moment kind of.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the energy, I guess, or the vibe of it, where I just felt kind of stuck and I didn't feel like myself and I felt very down and depressed in a way, just low energy and like, vigor for life. And I didn't really know why. That was kind of my first, I didn't know at the time, but that was kind of like my first encounter of like, learning that I have social needs as a human and I need to like spend time with people, but also that I didn't have that like support network to like lean on in my moment of trial and tribulation. I didn't know it then, but that was kind of my first encounter of like being in a situation of not okay and then not having anyone to catch me and like just like falling, like in being in free fall. I serendipitously got myself out of the situation when the next semester I ended up moving dorms for like other reasons. I moved into this residence. It's called Velocity, the Velocity residence. That was technically specifically for people who are interested in entrepreneurship. And there was like a whole like selection process, and there was like 70 people that lived in this building. And yeah, luckily they were a lot more interested in socializing there.
Mm-hmm.
So I just remember going there and it being like night and day. And yeah, again, none of it was done intentionally, but I kind of stumbled into this learning of, whoa, okay, I had this one experience where I was super isolated and talked to people and just tried to kind of suffer in silence, and that was miserable. And now I had this other experience where I was able to, connect with people and actually spend time with them and like start to develop meaningful friendships and relationships where there was an element of trust and you could be vulnerable with them. And that was a big, again, I didn't really know what was happening. I just was like, this is way better than before. And I don't want to go back to what I had before. So that was kind of the next step in the arc of just like, this whole like spending time with people, trust, vulnerability, socializing there's something about it.
Yeah. I mean, similar to the having the door kind of shut in your face, do you remember like a contrary memory from Velocity where you started to really directly feel the social energy around you and realize that it was at your disposal?
I just remember feeling like really happy and like fulfilled and whole and content.
Yeah.
Like it's the first time I think I really experienced like the phenomenon of doing like a late night fast food run with your friends.
Yeah.
Like
Timmy's runs?
Well, this was a McDonald's run.
Yeah.
At like 2 a.m. I think it was just like one of those moments where in the middle of the semester, it's like 1:30 a.m. and you're just messaging the group chat like, hey, is anyone still up? Does anyone want to get McDonald's? And then like you get all hyped, the group gets hyped up over this stupid idea of just because I think one of our friends had a car that semester, which was
I was asking like, where did you go to McDonald's? Yeah, having a car would make that work.
And it was the dead of winter. It's freaking cold.
Yeah.
And I just remember like assembling like in front of the door at like, we're like, all right, let's meet in like 10 minutes. Everyone just comes down. We're in our like winter coats. And then we like sprint out to the car because it's freaking cold. And then we just drove over to McDonald's. So we order way too much food, like, like 40 nuggets kind of thing. And you're just sitting there eating disgusting fast food at 2 a.m. and talking about life.
Yeah.
Homies. You're kicking it. And like, life aspirations and struggles and all that stuff, all that yummy goodness.
Yeah, you got your squad back.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was nice to just like do dumb things with your friends and talk about life at 3, 4 in the morning. And then, we drove back. It was like 4 or 5 a.m. Sun was starting to come up and I was like, wow, that was so dumb. But I feel so whole as a human and just, came home and passed out. Like, though there were several of moments like that where you were just able to like forget about all the existential dread that you have as a college freshman. Like, what am I doing with my life? Like, got to get an internship, all these things, all this pressure just kind of like evaporated. And it was like you got to be human with some people.
Yeah, man, I feel the levity. Like I feel that like this gooning around at 5 a.m. with these people going to McDonald's is the emotional opposite of having this door shut in your face.
Yeah, pretty much. So yeah, a lot of serendipity on my end, but I left that second semester of freshman year being like, there's something about this setup that is correct. I don't really know what it is, but I like it. And I think I kind of need it. And I would like more of that. And I think from that point onward, that was the seed that got planted. And then just over time, I just, through experimentation really of knowing that, hey, this is kind of cool.
Right. Yeah. I think a really common recurring thread is how challenging it is to confront how much intentionality is needed as an adult. And then in high school, you had all of these automatic mechanisms around you and people that at least a big chunk of the things that they were confronting regularly were similar. You're moving through life in lockstep with other people. People's focuses were usually the same. I think similar to you, I felt my social needs pretty well met in high school. Some of that was a good relationship with my mom. And every time I'd be going off to school, she would drive me, or when I got my license, I would start driving myself and she'd be in the passenger seat until we got to the school. And we would just talk about what I've been learning, what was going on. She would share stories from work. Sometimes she would just be sharing jokes that, like dumb jokes that her coworker told her. And I found that really connective. And it always meant that no matter what was going on in my life, there was always that stable touch point that would always kind of bring me back to level. And if I was not okay, I knew she would check in on me and be like, hey, like, what's going on? And then beyond that, I had the network of friends around me. And I think that having people around you is one thing, but I think that you really need kind of like dead time with people where you're not really like doing anything actively, but it's people that you feel comfortable with. So that's why I think that, for instance, like that McDonald's trip was important, because like it's not like you're super focused on doing anything. You're gooning around and you're kind of like delusional from being a little bit sleep deprived and it being 4 a.m.
Mm.
And I think for me at that time in high school was oftentimes, and actually in middle school as well, was the time commuting home after school. So a bunch of my friends would have taken like public transit at that time. So we were all be waiting around for the bus, and while we were just waiting for the bus or eating snacks that we were getting because we're cold, or we're huddled around the one warm vent in the bus shelter trying to warm up in the cold Ottawa winters,
Mm.
that inevitably stuff would just come up about what was going on in our lives. And it was similarly like, if we were like really not okay, the other people around us would notice me, like, hey, like what's going on? Are you okay? And then when I got to university, I think I similarly went through a phase where I kind of lost contact with that. And it was a bit of a longer arc for me. When I first got there, I was super excited to be surrounded by people that I had this technical connection with. Like, I grew up mostly as kind of the computer read software guy among my friends, not exclusively, but more or less. And then I threw myself into an environment at Waterloo where I was like one of hundreds. And initially it was great. It's like, oh man, there's so many people that get this part of me now. But over time, I started to recognize, oh, like a lot of these people only get this part of me. And because it's so prevalent in all of the things we're doing, all the schoolwork we're doing, all the jobs we're applying for, it was so easy to have that as almost the sole common denominator, that we would keep being pulled back to talk about the same things over and over again. And I'd spent hundreds of hours with these people, but knew almost nothing about their internal lives. And I shared almost nothing about mine. And I think that didn't really bother me until I went through the end of a really long relationship. It was like the end of like a 4-year relationship. And I remember I like hopped on the bus from Waterloo to Toronto, and had to end this relationship. At the time I framed it as a break because I was very immature and didn't know how to fully own the fact that it was the end of the relationship. And I remember hopping back on the bus on the same night to head back to Waterloo. And I remember, in the most movie dramatic possible way, it was like drizzling outside, staring out the window. And then I remember getting back to my off-campus housing and then looking at my roommates' doors and realizing like I don't want to talk to them. And that sucked. And I realized it was because none of us had ever taken the step to be vulnerable about what was going on in our lives in a non-academic professional context. And because none of us had ever talked about it, it almost felt like it wasn't like anyone had ever pushed against it. It was just we'd spent so much time together with no one ever broaching the topic.
Mm.
It kind of became this unspoken truth that we don't talk about this stuff. It was the norm, yeah. So I remember going back to my room and realizing like, man, like I do not have the people around me that I need to support in the situation. And I remember pretty soon after that, really sitting down and thinking, who are the people in my lives that actually can play this role? And I wrote an email to all of them being like, hey, like this is where I'm at in life. And I realized I haven't really been talking to any of you what's going on, but I'm like super lost right now. So I sent it to family, sent it to a couple of close friends, but mostly those friends were people that I knew from high school or sometimes earlier. And that was the point where I started to recognize like, man, it really sucks not having people around me that know what's going on with me at a deep level. So I started to seek that out. And, I think if I was in a similar situation now, I would have at least tried to have this kind of connection with my roommates. But at the time, because the norm felt so strongly established, I didn't bother to push against it. So a couple months later, I ended up coming down to San Francisco for an internship. So this is the beginning of 2013. And really conveniently, there was a bunch of intern events that this group of housemates didn't usually go to. So a lot of my housemates did come down to San Francisco as well. They were repeatedly being organized by someone that ended up being one of my really, really close friends named Owen. And I just found out for whatever reason that we fell into a pattern of conversation that it felt much more like us going through the same struggles in the same time and not just like professional academic ones. In fact, one of the things I really liked about the group that I fell into was it was almost an unspoken norm to not do that, to not talk about work too much, not talk about like academics or careers. It was kind of all the other parts of being in your early 20s. We would go on adventures together. We would like go ride ATVs together. We would talk about dating stuff together. And then with this one specific friend, we would like bond over really sappy Wong Fu videos and just talk about the feels that we got from doing that. So he was one of the first people that I started to really feel like, oh man, like this is what it really feels like to have someone that has full context on my life. That's not like a romantic partner. Because before I had leaned really hard romantic partner for this. And then like years later, after I started another relationship and then eventually ended it, when that relationship ended, I looked around and I realized that I had this kind of connection at my disposal now. So in the week leading up to what I thought was going to be the breakup and ultimately was, I set up calls or walks with 5 close friends. And I just talked through my entire process, what was going through with each of them. And it felt natural because I had had these kind of conversations with them before. So it didn't feel like I had to both do the emotional processing and break new relational ground at the same time. And they each had these really helpful different perspectives to offer. I remember one of them, this was Freddie, my friend Freddie. He just really specifically said like, hey man, like whatever you decide to do here, it's okay. But I want you to remember that you're more resilient than you think and that you're going to be okay. And then another friend, friend Tommy, he just talked to me about how he thinks about relationships and the things that are ultimately important to him to help me think about what my values are in these relationships. And another friend, John, he just said like, okay, let's take a step back from the relationship thing and talk about what you're pursuing in life more broadly. And like, are you okay? So each one of those kind of conversations was just not available to me during the first breakup. But during the second one, I had all of these people, all these different perceptions. And then another person that after the breakup happened, he just let me stay at his place for a while. So even though that second breakup was in many ways harder than the first one, I felt more lost. I had this net to catch me and all these people around me that knew me well enough to know what I needed, or at least to be able to deeply listen to me so that I had this like deep feeling of I'm not okay, but I'm gonna be okay. I had this clarity that this really sucks, but my place in the world is not defined purely by this relationship. And yeah, I mean, like my squad's got me. So the contrast between those two different experiences is one of the clearest examples to me of just how different it can feel to have that network versus not have it.
Nice. Wow. I like that sit. It's a very beautiful memory, I
Yeah.
think, in hindsight. Like, it sounds like you experienced, I guess, having to work through a pretty intense emotional issue completely on your own and somewhat in an isolated manner.
Mhm.
And then having people to talk through it in depth with, and then each of those people giving you a grounding perspective.
Mhm.
Almost like reminding you of things that you know probably, but
Yeah.
in the moment you can't really clearly see. And that helped kind of like bring you back to like recalibrate in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, it helps me recalibrate, helps me remember what my values are and take a longer term perspective on things. Because like I think when you're in the moment of this really intense emotional distress, it always kind of feels like it's going to be forever, even if you know that it's not. And it's helpful to have these friends around you to remind you, like, hey, it's not going to be forever. Like you're going to get through this, no matter what you end up deciding to do here. And we all like you for who you are. So just like keep working on the things you think are important, and you'll do fine.
It's huge. I'm curious to learn about like, so you mentioned that there's this pretty strong juxtaposition of going through this similar experience with and without
Yeah.
support system. At what point did you conceptualize that a support system is a thing? And then at what point did you start? Did you learn or realize that, oh, like this is a thing that I can be intentional about and that I should be intentional about?
Yeah. I don't know when I first would have actually framed it that way, but I do really specifically remember when I started the second really long relationship that I had this clarity of I cannot let my entire emotional weight fall on this one person. I need to keep up my hobbies. I need to maintain my friendships.
Yeah.
I need to maintain my own sense of identity. And that doesn't mean avoiding investment in the relationship. I definitely did not do that. It just meant a recognition that I'm not trying to reallocate all of my emotional needs into one person. And I've fallen in and out of cycles of doing that more or less. But in some ways, I think that was a recognition of a support network. Keeping network, not like support individual.
Support node.
Yeah, not support node. Exactly. Not trying to stand on the pin of a head and then have everything balanced on this one pin standing on the ground, hoping the pin doesn't collapse under the weight. So I think that was the first time it became really clear to me that I was intentionally trying to do that kind of distribution. And then I think just honestly from observation of friends going through breakups and recognizing that they typically do this kind of redistribution of the load they're putting on their partner, and they start to spread it out over more people. And I started to just notice that when people did that, it was typically a good thing. It usually resulted in them feeling more connected to more different people and bonded more people together, and realizing that, like, you know what, that's kind of dope. I kind of want more of that. And then occasionally friends would do things that would make it really clear that that's what was going on. Like, I remember, this is also a thing that I think I got from Owen. There was a couple of times where he like convened what I think he called his life council. And he literally just like gathered a bunch of his friends together and being like, look, I'm trying to make this decision. What do I do here? So he just like put the most important nodes in his support network in a room and be like, all right, what do I do? And it was usually about relationship stuff.
That's incredible.
I know, just the trust that he's putting in these people and making it visible that he's doing this.
That's so interesting. Did you guys debate on his behalf?
A little bit, yeah. Yeah,
That's kind of sick.
It was a little bit like, yeah, like, I don't think that's really what his values are about. Or
Wow.
like, I know you say that that's like what you want, but like, dude, I know you're going to try doing this anyway. I know you're worried about this, but I also know that you're not going to quit based on dumb reasons. So like, keep going.
Yeah. I mean, what's coming up for me now as we're like drudging up these old memories is like post-college, I think there's another kind of inflection point where it's very common for people to be like, wait, they start to really ask this question of how do I make friends?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So to your point, like in high school, it's not just available, it's automatic. In college, it's always available, but you have to like choose to go do it.
Yeah.
The answer of where do you go make friends is like, you talk to people after class, you go to clubs. There's like pretty clear answers to those questions.
Exactly.
Whereas an adult, it's like, oh man, like where do I even go?
Yeah.
Like where do people even hang out and talk in a way that the same group of people is going to be showing up in a recurring manner?
Yeah.
And like, how do I choose my friends now in this environment where there isn't this kind of automatic process of repeatedly bumping into the same people over and over and over again? So, I mean, you've talked about that, the ways in which going from high school to college forced you to recognize this need and then learn how to lean into the environment of college in a way that allowed you to have that kind of support you needed. When you graduated, how did you navigate that transition?
Yeah, I think the next like big inflection point was, graduating college. I had all this like new grad energy, just like trying to meet as much people as possible. I spent a lot of time just saying yes to a lot of things and socializing with a lot of people, going to parties and such, going to events. I'm also naturally a very social person.
Yes.
And definitely identify as extroverted. I think, honestly, looking back, I think underneath that thought was the intention. I didn't know it at the time or wasn't able to label it, but I think the intention was to create a support system.
Yeah.
I was still just blindly slamming into walls and just like trying to meet people and like, seeing where they would go. And then haphazardly, sometimes the conversations would go well, sometimes they would not. Yeah. Because it's interesting. Like for me, after the new grad energy was just starting to dissipate was immediately when COVID hit. So I was kind of going through almost the peak of my social energy of like going out all the time, meeting people, and then boom, like zero, like quarantine, like the exact opposite. So in my journey for like support systems, I think I realized during that time while I was in quarantine, like that first month, it had flavors, like very strong flavors of exactly what I experienced in
Yeah.
freshman year. And so that first month of like being stuck at home, not being able to see anybody, I just like watched myself like slowly get mildly depressed again. And I was
Yeah.
like, okay, it's happening again. At this point, I at least know that the solution is humans.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, I was at least, that was kind of my first intentional step, like scheduling a lot of time to like be on calls with people and realizing that like I definitely needed that. And then having that be, I guess, verified by just like, I would feel better every time I like hopped off a call. I would feel myself naturally drawn towards just messaging people to catch up. Even people that I hadn't talked to in a very long time, I was almost just kind of like clamoring,
Yeah.
like in a desperate way. Just like, wow, I really need human connection and I'm disconnected from all of it. I think that was like the first intentional step.
Mm. So it sounds like many of the transitions were things where you might have had some kind of sense that things were starting to feel different, but it's mostly kind of just stumbling around, following your normal extrovert tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
But when COVID hit, you started to have this feeling, you're like, I remember this. And I know that part of the solution is humans. Time to start throwing out social energy to get something back.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's actually where I learned, where I really started to experience the difference between time and quality time.
Mm.
Because some conversation, I didn't have the labels back then, but some conversation I would just walk out of being, I feel more drained. I would hit up some people, we would hop on like a call and I would feel worse than I did going in.
Yeah.
At least from an energy level. Not that, you know, nothing against them, just
Mm.
we didn't really connect on anything. Right? We just kind of like talked about like the weather or things like that. You know, we never really progressed into the real meaningful stuff that, you know, I now know is what really recharges me.
Yeah.
So that was my first kind of encounter, right? With just like playing around with it, kind of being forced to in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then realizing that, I don't know what it is, but sometimes I talk to these people and it feels great. Sometimes I talk to these people and I just feel more tired. I don't really feel motivated to like talk to them more because they drain. So yeah, that was I forgot about that actually, but that was a pretty meaningful step in that direction.
Yeah. It sounds like you're becoming more discerning over time and recognizing that it's okay to lean more into the conversations and the connections and relationships that energize you. And also just having more clarity around which relationships those are.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for me, an interesting layer on top of this is that at this point in my life, I still felt very guilty about reaching out to people and intentionally like spending this time with them. There was two flavors of that guilt. One, I thought it was a waste of time still because I hadn't been able to intentionally point at this is why it's beneficial.
Yeah.
It just felt like an impulse that I like was satisfying.
Oh.
Right. Like, so I always felt guilty. I'm like, oh, why are we not like, I don't know, reading more or like working more? Like, why are we like messaging people that like hop on calls? Like, ugh, it just feels like such a waste of time. Yeah. And then I guess the second flavor of the guilt was also that I just didn't really, because again of the lack of intentionality of the goal, like I just didn't know like what I was looking for from the other person. Like it almost felt like I was using them in a way, or just like I was bored and so I wanted to fill time.
Yeah.
And so that also kind of added to it a little bit, where I felt really bad about it for a very long time.
Does that feel resolved now?
Yeah, a little bit. Like in hindsight, I'm just like, I have these needs, and part of me was screaming out for the need for human connection. And that's how I manifested, right? Because I was unaware of it. It just was like felt like this impulse of, man, I like for some reason I feel really drawn to like messaging people and asking them to hang out.
Yeah. I mean, I also think it's important to recognize that I suspect that the way that you were engaging was not manipulative in any way. So there's no way in which you're using these people and that you're asking them if they want to do something and they're saying yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And especially if it's happening in a repeating way, if people are not enjoying something, unless they feel very obligated for some reason, they will eventually say no, or they'll just ghost you.
That's true. I guess to poke at it a little more, it's just like, it felt bad because sometimes like in those moments where I would describe where like I would walk away from the conversation feeling very drained and like, actually, I don't want to keep talking to you anymore. Like that feels, that feels not good. Right. Like, cause it's another one of those expectation things where it's like, oh, like I've expressed that I wanted to be friends. And then actually I decided after we tried to be friends that I don't want to be friends.
Yeah.
And then there's this weird like friend breakup thing that kind of subtly happens. And you're like, ooh, that feels bad.
Yeah. Okay. So that actually leads me into something I'm very curious to hear how you think about.
Mm.
How do you deal with situations in support that are really asymmetric, where it eventually becomes clear that one person's always reaching out to the other for help and it never goes the other way? So I've seen this happen in a couple different ways. I've actually been on both sides of this, where sometimes I notice that I'm just asking for help from someone a lot more often than they come to me. And I've also had the opposite, where someone is coming to me and I start to recognize that like, if I needed help right now, I would not go to this person. And I found both situations hard to navigate, but especially the one where I recognize that they're coming to me for help and I don't really need their help.
I think about it from the like sustainability perspectives,
Yeah.
where I think the people that really stick around are the ones that it is like, it's not always going to be 50-50, right? But like to a, you know, I don't know, acceptable margin reciprocated. I don't think it works if like one person is really vulnerable and trusts you with the thing with like their like, I don't know, all the mess that they're going through, but you don't feel the same way about them.
Yeah.
I think eventually it just breaks down. I think eventually one party will just like run out of energy, or like you'll experience it as a net drain and it feels exhausting because you're not at the same level in a way. And then I think at some point, whether you like it or not, you'll be forced away from it because you'll just be like, man, talking to this person is just super draining. And even if you feel like guilt around that, you feel like you want to really help them, I think eventually there's a tipping point where you're just like, okay, I can't like keep doing this forever, and you'll eventually pull away.
Have you had to like draw a boundary with someone in that situation before? I have done this in the past, but I at the time did not have any of the language for it, so I did it very poorly.
I don't think I have. I think not explicitly. I found that for me, you just generally, it's not intentional. You just, again, feel super tired talking to this person. And so I just found that I naturally like, kind of like, I literally like, you know, not literally, but like I lean away emotionally.
Yeah.
And I think that people get it eventually.
Yeah.
I've never had someone kind of like not like quote unquote take a hint, I guess.
Right.
That I'm not really feeling the friendship essentially, or the I don't know, supportive relationship the same way.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Okay. I guess I can talk a bit about my own
please
path here. Yeah. Like I think that this trope of you are the average of your 5 closest friends is quite accurate. So if you start to average together the perspectives of all those people, you start to kind of come home to yourself. And because I've successfully loaned out all of these spare keys of my own internal model to these people, when it comes together, it helps me reorient myself in the world in a way that allows me to feel much less lost. Does not make me feel not lost, just less lost. So I have some sense of direction. And I think that that's where I'm at now. And I am very intentional in building this now and intentional in reaching out for this kind of help when I need it. I think that's actually was a pretty significant change as well. I went from having this network in a way where if I saw the people, I would feel comfortable talking about this stuff, to now being comfortable just reaching out directly, being like, hey, I am having a struggle right now. Are you free to talk right now? And that doesn't mean they're always going to be free, but if you have more people distributed, it's more likely that one of them is going to pick up the phone.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of value in having that more distributed network now, rather than it being super concentrated in only like 1 or 2 people. While still retaining a few people like you that have huge context on my life that feel confident challenging me after listening deeply.
What a share. That was awesome. I think, I mean, everything you said deeply resonated. I think the overarching theme across both of our stories is you're okay until you're not okay.
Yeah.
And then it's those moments where you're not okay and you're falling, you look around and you realize, wait a minute, there's nothing here to catch me. Feels like that's kind of the inciting incident for, whoa, support systems are a thing.
Yeah.
Right. For both of us. And I really like the phrase of your ability to come home to yourself. Yeah. That's so warm. I like that a lot.
Yeah. And for me, those inflection points typically were when had relationships end.
Mhm.
But I think for some other people, other kinds of phase of life things will do this. Like I think, for
Yeah.
instance, leaving a job can be similar when
For
someone
sure.
is really heavily invested. Their whole network's inside that company, their whole sense of identity is there. And then once they leave there, they can feel a little bit like they're adrift. And that's
Lost.
lost. And that's, again, where having this kind of network that's not attached to this singular thread of your identity can be super helpful. So I think that the external perspective I get is that you've been more proactively adding people to this network, even people that you've met relatively recently.
Mhm.
So what are the cues to you that you'd like to add someone to that network? I do find it really hard to figure out if we both have bandwidth for that. Like,
Oh yeah, for sure, dude.
there's,
Yeah.
I think similar to you, because I now have a much stronger tendency to lean more into the kind of vulnerable, like I want to talk about what people are struggling with kind of
Yeah.
conversations. When I'm in person with them, because I'm hanging out with them for whatever reason already, I feel quite comfortable doing that now.
Mhm.
But there's a step beyond that of trying to become part of their life that I'm like way more hesitant to step over that line.
Yeah.
And it's in part because I don't want to like indicate that I'm going to show up in a way that I eventually realize like, actually, I don't have the time or energy for this.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that checks out. I think my approach to this, I just kind of let it play out.
Yeah.
I just try not to force anything or rush anything. And if it happens, it happens. There's kind of, if I think about the people that are in my support system now, I'll say that generally it tends to take like a year or two before I like really am like, okay, this person's like built into the scaffolding. Like they're in there now. And what happens, I think, over those 1 to 2 years of getting to know the person is like, they're just like within that time, inevitably, you're going to be put in a situation where you're not okay.
Yeah.
And it's like you were saying, like do they come to mind as someone that you can potentially reach out to? And in those moments, if you so decide for whatever reason to reach out, that's kind of like not a test per se, but that's kind of like your first little, dipping your toe in there and seeing, is this person going to be potentially good? Are they supportive kind of in the, in the way that you need, which kind of makes sense, right? First, you must be in a state where you need support, and then you go find it. And then you slowly learn over time by trusting this person more and more that they got you. And then eventually they get integrated into the fabric because over time you see that over and over again, they got you. And like, all right, I guess you got me now.
Yeah. So it sounds like a lot of this is just about willingness to engage and keeping people in mind. And over time, these things tend to kind of figure themselves out. Yeah. So the question that's drawing me now is, I think that we both managed to assemble these kind of support structures over time and both very grateful for them. For people that have really struggled to set that up, or another way of putting this is, if you were to talk to a much younger version of yourself that was missing this, how might you try to guide them?
What comes to mind is, it's really hard, but I think the first big thing is you need to be able to trust people.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's a gamble in a way. There are going to be people that you muster up the courage to like be open and vulnerable with, and they're just going to like take that and just like throw it back in your face. Either intentionally, although hopefully not, or unintentionally, right? But I think what needs to happen is you just need to be able to muster up the courage. And this could take a long time. Like that buildup of trust could take, I don't know, weeks, months, until you reach that, required activation energy. And then you try, and then it either goes well or it doesn't. And then you just have to, I think, try to let yourself be open to that possibility. Like people are kind of on their own timeline on when they're open to it. But I think that's the first major key, not to quote DJ Khaled. We're dating ourselves.
Oh my God.
With these references.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. I think being open about what's going on in your life, and especially the things you're currently struggling with, I think is a really important part. But I think also what you're saying is, it's important to recognize that it's not going to be a 100% hit rate. Like, I haven't really had experiences of people throwing things back at me, but I have had a bunch of experiences where I'll talk about something I'm going through, and the other person either just doesn't know matching experience and doesn't really know how to help someone else process by active listening. Or if they do have a similar experience, their comfort in talking about it is just not there yet. So it feels very one-sided. The second thing especially, I think I've hit quite a few times,
Yeah, what's coming up for me now to add on to that is just don't be afraid to try
Yeah.
and don't be afraid to keep trying. I mean, it's really easy for me to say that, but I guess it's more specifically when you feel the fear come up. If it feels manageable to stretch through it on this specific day, like I would encourage my younger self to reach for it. If
Yeah.
it's in that moment within that 15% stretch zone of uncomfortable, but like you could go for it, then I would say 100% go for it. And then
Yeah.
like, if it turns out good or not, like just stick with it and keep trying because eventually you'll find those good people that you really vibe with, that really get you,
Mhm.
that, have good hearts and the best intentions for you. Cause really that's what it is at the end of the day, right? I think what you're looking for in your support people are people who want the best for you,
Mm.
that like care about you to that level and like genuinely want to be there for you because of who you are and just who you are naturally, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think showing someone who you really are requires you to disclose the things you struggle with, because
Oh,
I think that
100%. Yeah.
people's struggles are very fundamental to who they are. And yeah, I keep coming back to this idea of it being important to go first. I think if someone starts asking about things that are really personal for me, when I don't have that trust built up yet, it can feel a little bit invasive
Yeah.
and a little bit interrogating. And I'm saying this as someone that used to do this, where I would ask people these really personal questions. And it was only from a combination of awkward situations and from very specifically having these discussions as part of relating between the lines that I came to appreciate that balance and vulnerability is really important. And one of the ways of doing that is to offer up bits of yourself and then connect that with questions about the other person to make it clear that, look, I'm willing to trust, but I'm also going to ask you to trust. And when those connections can get made from both people checking the box and being like, yeah, I'm in, then I think you can start to build out this kind of support network stuff. And I mean, I've also come to appreciate that there's vulnerability in the sense of sharing, but asking someone for their advice is also another kind of vulnerability. And I think that once you start asking someone for their advice and showing that you actually care about it, they're also more likely to ask you and reach out to you for help. And that just keeps bonding people closer and closer.
100%. I think that was also one of the cool things that I learned, like to get super tactical for a second
Yeah.
through RBTL is that like one situation you might struggle with in your pursuit to give first in the vulnerability sense is sometimes you're just curious about like, or like you want to support the other person. That's why you're asking.
Yeah.
But all that comes to you in the moment is the question. You're like, man, like I want to give them vulnerability first to show them that, you know, to go first essentially and say that like, hey, like you can trust me. I'm going to trust you first. But sometimes what comes up is the question.
Yeah.
And one thing that we talk about in the course is that one way to be vulnerable in those moments is to disclose why you're asking. And I thought that was like a small but pretty profound thing. You can also disclose to the person, like, this is why I'm asking. It's because I want to support you or because I want to learn from you. That is a surprisingly vulnerable share to like be that explicit to the other person about like, this is why I'm asking. And something that I also really appreciated.
Yeah. And in some situations, it can like really significantly change the context of like what the question feels like, even for the exact same question. Like, for instance, if I asked someone, what is depression been feeling like for you? And I'm asking because like I've had my own experiences with it and I want to see if something from my own past might help you. That's very different than like, what are you experiencing? Because I want to see if this is actually depression.
Yeah.
The second question would like immediately shut me down and being like, okay, well, I'm not here to be diagnosed. Like that's not what this is about.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you omit the intent and you don't explain why you're asking, then it's totally up to the other person's read of the situation, which might be totally different than what's going on in your head as you're asking.
Power of going first.
Yes, the power of going first. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Wonder if there's anything else I'm curious about. I guess like, well, I guess maybe would love to get your thoughts on this too, right? Like if you were giving your younger self tips on building a support network or maybe even the importance of it, like what would that conversation look like if you could sit past Jamie down and just be like, today we're going to talk about support systems.
Yeah. The two immediate things that come to mind are what we just talked about in terms of going first and recognizing that if you want to know more emotional content from other people's lives, going first is very disarming
Mm-hmm.
and makes you easier to trust.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the second thing really is recognizing the value of having this in many people, even though it can be sometimes kind of tiring talking about the same thing over and over again with different people,
Mm-hmm.
that the different perspectives that you get from different people and the relationships that get built around those are really valuable. And having many people to lean on will help as different people's life circumstances change. Friends move around, friends get into relationships where they need to attend to that relationship and don't have the same amount of time for you. And it's not because you're not important, it's just because people only have so much time and energy, and sometimes they don't have the energy to support you. But uh the if you have enough people that are in this camp, then it becomes easier and easier to reliably have someone to talk to about what's going on in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've talked about this concept of anti-fragility before.
Yeah.
And that rings true. Definitely have been in camps where I've just been telling the same stories over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it definitely helps to have a fresh set of ears to go through that process. Because sometimes, like, as you're dealing with things, that's what you need. You need to talk about it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And definitely from personal experience, like dumping all of that on a single person can be a lot. Like, even if the other person has the best intentions, they really do care about you. It's like, again, they're only human. They only have so much bandwidth, so
Right.
much energy, right? People get bored. They get frustrated. They're like, man,
Yeah.
we talked about this for hours now or days even, you know? And so, yeah, it is really helpful, I think, to have other people to lean on, both from a energy bandwidth perspective, because you can literally think about, like, the absolute total bandwidth you have access to is the sum of all the bandwidths of all your friends. And then there's also the fact that different people have different perspectives.
Yeah.
And that's also super helpful.
I think one of the most specific like versions of that I think is really important is if you're going through hard times in relationships, I think it's very important to have both single friends and friends in relationships.
Right. Yeah.
Because I think people have very different biases because of that.
Yeah, exactly. And like their own different experiences, right? It's almost like, and we talked about, like, you know, the total amount of bandwidth summation, but there's also the total amount of wisdom summation, right? Different people have different sets of things that they've learned from their own experiences. And the more friends you have in this camp, the more knowledge and theory and wisdom you have at your disposal to help you make the best decision.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. You know, if you want relationship advice, definitely helpful to have it from multiple genders, different phases of life, different relationship experiences.
Yeah.
And it will probably help you see more clearly.
Exactly. There does come a point of diminishing returns where I think, like, you can't actually sustainably have that many people in the support system. I'm curious for you, because for me, in my mind, the number is somewhere around 4 to 6, where, like, that feels like, for some reason, that feels like the plateau, where, like, beyond that 6 number, like, I just feel like I would be stretched like a little too thin.
Yeah. And there's different levels of this. Like, there's the people that might call me up on like a almost weekly basis and talk to me about something. And then there's ones that are like once a year. I have a pretty clear list of people that I would feel very comfortable reaching out for absolutely anything. And I think that, oh man, I'm like, this is starting to feel a little edgy to talk about, because I'm like, people are gonna be like, am I on the list? Am I on the list? But yeah, I think like the 4 to 6 range is about right. Which, you know, if you think about, for instance, weddings and the size of bridal parties and groom's parties, that's like the rough size. And I think that it's something pretty innate about human dynamics that makes it that way.
Yeah, I mean, to the point of the edginess, though, I feel like it feels a little bad to think about or talk through, but at the same time, I think it's honestly, like, pretty fair. There comes a point where if you try to extend it yourself, you're like doing both yourself and the other person a disservice. Like you were saying, like, you can't, because then you're kind of messaging that I can show up for you in this way, but if you don't have the bandwidth, you can't show up for them that way. So yeah, I think this type of boundary setting is, like, honestly best for all the parties. And to push it a little further in a way, just because I think we can all use this examination at some point, is just like, how good of a friend are you being? Just, that's kind of part of it as well, right? Like, the degree to which you're open to being vulnerable, the degree to which you're a good listener, the way that you show up for other people, that also matters too. So,
Mhm.
and I think we can all always get better at that. So, yeah, I don't think it's a little edgy, but I think it's also, if we really look at it, it's kind of fair, to be honest, and
Yeah.
healthy.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, you can call it there. I feel pretty good
Yeah.
and complete around this topic too. Any closing thoughts you want to close on about support systems? Any last lingering thoughts?
Having one is good.
Yes. Yeah. If you take nothing else from this episode, you should think about whether or not you have a good support system and the degree to which you've been intentionally cultivating it, trying to invest in it, trying to find these, like, your squad, your
Yeah.
crew. Because I don't know. I honestly couldn't imagine what my life would be without it now,
Mm.
which is kind of funny because for the vast majority of my life, I actually didn't and somehow still survived.
Yeah.
But that might not be the right metric to look at.
Yeah,
'Cause-
surviving is not the metric. Thriving is what you want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Nice. Yeah, exactly that. Yeah. Again, most of my life, smashing into walls. Very painful. Like,
Yeah.
probably someone could have probably used someone to tell me, like, hey, you're about to smash into a wall, even though you can't see it right now, but I can see for you.
Yeah.
That kind of energy, right? So, yeah, I hope for all the listeners out there that you all have fantastic, healthy, reliable support systems as well.
Yeah.
It's
And
a game
also
changer.
recognize that if you don't, then there's ways to build them. And it takes time and it's hard work, but it's worth it.
Yes. So much yes. Your people are out there. It's like similar to, I don't know, relationships, like so many fish in the sea. Like there are, I don't know if anyone needs to hear this right now, but like keep believing that there are your people out there, like people who genuinely care about you and want the best for you and are healthy for you. Those people exist and they're out there and they're open to having you in their life. Sometimes you just got to keep swimming.
Yeah. All right. Where are you at now emotionally?
Like 8 or a 9.
Wow.
Yeah. It's pumping over here. Loving the love support system. I just think, physically, still about the same. Like it's a little higher, honestly, even physically, like 5 or 6. Yeah.
I think I'm like slightly higher. I'm like a 7 emotionally and I'm like a 5 physically still. I think I feel calmer than when we started, a little bit less restless, but still quite ready to go home and go to bed.
Nice. Yeah, it's pretty late. I think unlike, there's still some turbulence just from life, but
Yeah.
I'd say it's like 80% gratitude right now. Just like appreciating both all the people in my life as well as myself for like learning all these things and smashing in all these walls and, coming out bloodied, but still alive and with learnings every time. And now I feel like my eyes are a little open now, not as blindly smashing into things and starting to be more intentional, which feels really good. And then I appreciate myself for the courage that all of those steps took up to the point where I'm willing to like tap people on the shoulder and be like, I'm not okay right now. Can we talk about that?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's awesome.
What a ride. More to come though. So anyway, I think we're gonna call it there. So thank you for listening. As
See you later.
always, we appreciate you. Yeah, we'll see you in 2 weeks. If you enjoyed this conversation, please help us by leaving a rating on your favorite podcast app. We would really appreciate it because it helps us grow and lets others find the show.
When we're not podcasting, Kevin also makes YouTube videos.
And Jamie has a blog. You can find links to these in the episode description.
The intro music you heard in this episode was made by Harry Dye.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you in 2 weeks.